Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. I think most of the time when I'm thinking about Allan Holdsworth and his solos and the way that he improvises, then I'm not really thinking too much about how he's using arpeggios. I don't think that's a very huge part of his playing. I think his playing is much more based on scales and scale patterns and also fingerings that he can move around when he's improvising. I think that's a bigger part of how he's coming up with melodies, to the point where maybe he doesn't like arpeggios because they're a little bit obvious sounding. So I'm connecting it more to stuff like, so stuff that's really based around moving around scale fragments and using that. And of course he has his own sort of 4 notes per string and extended reach, but it's not heavily or it's not really filled with a lot of arpeggio movement. That doesn't mean that he doesn't use it, because you also have places in Devil Take the Hindmost where he's moving around triads a lot. There's also one in the other solo that I analyzed, which is called 60 Men of Tain. There's also a passage where he's really using the diatonic triads. So of course he does use arpeggios, but it's not really a huge part of what he plays. I made the observation about the stuff that I learned from him, probably because the music that I play is different from the music that he plays. I tend to actually use the things that are arpeggio based that I got from him more. So I thought it would be interesting to just look at some of the places where he does use arpeggios, because he has some really beautiful lines doing this. And I took one solo which is off his instructional video actually, but it's with a complete band. Then I'm going to take a look at some of the different phrases where he's using arpeggios within that solo. And I think these examples really highlight how he's using quartal harmony as arpeggios quite a lot. At least he does in this solo. And he's also using or constructing arpeggios by stacking some triads together in a nice way. And I think these are really nice examples of how you can get some beautiful, very melodic lines. Also again, something that we don't always consider with Holdsworth, because the emphasis is almost always on the chromatic and the outside and the exotic sounds that he's using. But he's also a very melodic player, and I think this really highlights that. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, improve the way that you solo, check out some interesting arpeggios or chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. This example contains 2 or 3 arpeggios. That's a little bit open to interpretation, which of course is kind of going to happen quite often, because if you start really looking into what kind of arpeggios are available, then you can almost turn any set of notes into an arpeggio. But in this case, I think it's quite clearly starting with 2 arpeggios. It's a combination of 2 arpeggios. The chord that he's improvising over here is a D flat major 7, and it's D flat major 7 moving to D flat minor 7. And actually this whole piece is pretty tonal for an Allan Holdsworth composition, because it's fairly clearly in the key of A flat, and it also stays around that, and it actually moves around in quite a lot of tonal harmony within A flat also. So we have the 1 chord and we have 4 and we go to 4 minor, and then it goes back to 1, but now it's a minor chord. So in that way it's closer to a jazz standard and tonal and functional harmony than what you mostly have with Holdsworth compositions. Of course, now I'm talking about the progression that they're soloing over. The theme is on a more complicated, it's a more complicated story. What we have here is D flat major 7. He is playing a quartal arpeggio, a 4-note quartal arpeggio, and it's a very practical way of playing that. It's also one that I use quite a lot. Really, the idea is just to play a 4th interval on 1 string and then use a string skip, something that he uses quite a lot. This idea of repeating patterns and then shifting strings, and especially skipping strings. You hear that all the time in different kinds of melodies in his solos. So in this case, on the D flat major 7, starting on F, and then just having this quartal arpeggio. So that's this one. Then he continues with another arpeggio, which is a D flat major arpeggio, which is this one. So D flat major 7, starting on the major 7, or using the major 7 under the root, moving up to the B flat here, and then he continues on the D flat minor 7 with this phrase. And of course you could argue that this note set could be either a D flat minor triad or a D flat sus triad. That's a little bit hard to say what you want to hear that as. I kind of hear the sus thing quite clearly also, so you could of course start talking about a minor 11, but I think I just hear it more or less as a minor pentatonic phrase really. So and then chromaticism, and then ending the phrase down on the low G flat. This is another example of how he's using quartal harmony in his solo. It's different fingering wise, and I think really one of the things that's nice about the way that he plays quartal harmony in this solo, both with the example that I already covered and also with this one, is that he's using these repeating patterns that make it easier to play, because quartal harmony can be kind of tricky to play on guitar, because you get all the notes in one fret on different strings, and that's kind of a hassle to play for your right hand. So he gets around that quite nicely, and he also uses the repeating patterns, and he's very good at getting that into his playing and still really making music with it. I think that this solo in general, also because it's a more simple chord progression and more tonal chord progression, I think it really highlights how melodic he is as a player, and I think that's also something to take away from this video, and maybe go and check out his solo on this, because if you're not generally into what he plays because it's too much outside and stuff, then maybe you will actually hear more of what is going on, what it is that everybody's talking about when you check out a solo like this one. So the first part of this phrase is it's really just a scale one, so it's just up and down the scale. It's on the A flat major 7, beginning of the second chorus, I think. So just a scale one, nothing too fancy. And then we get the arpeggios, and he's playing a quartal arpeggio from the B flat, so like this. First a 3-part quartal arpeggio here, and then he skips up and plays the same phrase from C here, so that's a quartal arpeggio from C, so C, F and B flat, and then sliding up to the C and sustaining that note. And I think that's a really nice way to play an arpeggio like this. Of course it is a bit stretchy, and he does it really high here, but you can still do that down here and get it to sound good. And that's a really nice way of having a way of playing an arpeggio like that. That's something to check out and start using. One thing that's actually a bit unclear to me is that I'm not sure exactly what meter they've written this out in. So the way that I've written it out is just the way that I hear it, and I hear it as being either 6/8 or 12/8. And of course you could have written it out in 12/8 as well. That would just have meant that the bars were twice as long. That's really the only difference here. You can hear in the recording that the bass player is sort of clearly playing something that's either 6/8 or 12/8, and they're going a little bit back and forth in the feel, whether it's a sort of a 4/4 triplet feel or a waltz feel. So I chose to write it out in 6/8. I think that's kind of clear, easy to feel also most of the time, even though there's a lot happening, and they're not always being really obvious about it. I think mostly if you want to hang on to something, then you probably want to hang on to the bass player. He's pretty much sort of laying down the beat, and he's easy to follow. And of course, if you have an idea about what meter this is really supposed to be and the reason why that is, then feel free to leave a comment. That's definitely open to interpretation, and I'm also open for some input on that. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that I have a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page, and if you join us over on Patreon, then I can also give you something in return for your support. As I already said, I think this solo is probably one of my favorites when it comes to Holdsworth's playing. That's just one of the best ones, and it's, in a way, it's a little bit of pity that I only have this really mediocre quality YouTube video of it, but at the same time you can still hear that the playing is really great. And I think when I really started to check out some more Holdsworth stuff, just really not only listening to it because I liked it, but also really checking out what he was playing, then I decided to try and check out this solo because I really liked it, and I figured that if I had a YouTube video where I could see what he was playing, then it was going to be a lot easier. That turned out to be not as true as I'd hoped. It was still kind of annoying to check out. But if you do want to check out somebody who has really studied a lot of Holdsworth, and I think that's maybe worth recommending actually, then you should check out Derryl Gabels' channel. I'll link to one of his videos where he's explaining a solo from Metal Fatigue. Actually Metal Fatigue off the, I think it's also that song off the Metal Fatigue album, which is probably, I think that's the first Holdsworth solo that I actually ever listened to. And he really explains in detail what is going on and how to play it, so that's definitely worthwhile checking out. I'll link to it in the description of this video and also in a card here in the video. This example is really returning to a way of playing arpeggios that Holdsworth uses quite a lot. It's already been there once in the examples already because it's on the G flat major 7, and what he's doing is essentially he's building sort of a rich sounding major 7 arpeggio by combining a major 7 arpeggio with another triad, and I suspect that it may have to do with the way the fingering is again. So what we have in this line is first we get an enclosure, so it's a combination of a G flat major 7 and an E flat minor triad. And first we get sort of an enclosure of the G flat, so this, then that arpeggio, and then on the next string set of 2 strings, then we get an E flat minor arpeggio. So that's, and then he moves on to the E and resolves up to the 5th of the E major 7. So the idea is just to have the combination of the G flat and the E flat minor, and he uses this more often. There's an example of this in Devil Take the Hindmost, where he plays, but then he's combining it with an A sus triad, and there's also another example. So we already have the one where he doesn't play the highest note here because the chord changes, but it's the same idea of using this 2-string arpeggio and then moving on to the next string set to play what turns out to be a G flat major arpeggio actually in this case. And there's also an example of this in the solo to Protocosmos. So this is something that he uses quite a lot, and it is a nice idea to have sort of a way of creating arpeggios by just taking string sets and moving through triads, and that's something to work with as well that you can get into your playing besides just using this exact line. If you want to check out some more videos on Allan Holdsworth and his playing, then check out this playlist where I have some videos on some Holdsworth chord voicings and also another analysis of one of his solos, which is actually my favorite solo of the 16 Men of Tain album. If this is the first time you see one of my videos and you want to learn more about jazz guitar, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next time.